Ridley Scott has always been a director who thrives on contradiction. The man who gave us one of cinema's most chilling visions of the future in Blade Runner is also the man who brought Russell Crowe roaring through the Colosseum in Gladiator. A maestro of style, spectacle, and storytelling, Scott's influence on modern cinema is undeniable.
Story, and therefore so unusual and so different and against a tapestry or an arena in the world.
But for all his accomplishments, he is equally renowned for his sharp tongue and unfiltered opinions, which he has wielded over the years like a verbal broadsword. Most recently, his disdain for the Marvel Cinematic Universe, MCU, has stirred up its own hurricane of controversy, and if there's one thing Ridley Scott knows how to do, it's storm into a debate with all the subtlety of a CGI war elephant. "I'll crush it," Scott said in an interview, almost daring someone to suggest otherwise. "I'll f***ing crush it. They're f***ing boring as Their scripts are not any f***ing good." It's the kind of blunt dismissal that only a filmmaker of his stature could get away with, and even then, it feels like an audacious move. The MCU is, after all, the most dominant force in modern cinema.
You mean bad stories?
No, I guess I mean, look...
An empire that spans galaxies, multiverses, and the occasional Oscar nomination. Yet Scott's critique is nothing if not comprehensive. He doesn't just take aim at the storytelling, he also fires a few well-placed shots at the industry's over-reliance on visual effects. They're mostly saved by special effects, and that's becoming boring for everyone who works with special effects if you've got the money. The irony of Scott's comments, of course, is that his own career has been heavily reliant on visual effects. From the groundbreaking production design of Alien to the digital wizardry that brought ancient Rome to life in Gladiator, Scott has long embraced technology as a means of elevating his work. But there's a difference, at least in Scott's mind, between using effects as a tool and using them as a crutch.
Well, it's the continuation of that. And because I think the lid came off the Pandora's box with Prometheus.
For him, the problem with Marvel films isn't that they rely on spectacle. It's that the spectacle isn't in service of anything meaningful. Almost always the best films are driven by the characters, he insists, pointing to his own films as examples of how spectacle can complement, rather than overshadow, story and character. To hear Scott tell it, some of his own work could qualify as superhero movies, albeit of a more grounded and cerebral variety. "I think I've done 3 great scripted superhero movies," he said. "One would be Alien with Sigourney Weaver, one would be Gladiator, and one would be Harrison Ford." Presumably he's referring to Blade Runner in that last example, though it's not entirely clear.
Harrison and I fell out only because I was the new kid on the block in Hollywood, and I had never shot in Hollywood before, so that was my first film.
The idea of Alien as a superhero movie is certainly an intriguing one, with Ellen Ripley battling an unrelenting force of nature in the form of the xenomorph. And there's no denying that Maximus Decimus Meridius, with his righteous vengeance and iconic catchphrases, has more than a little in common with the caped crusaders of the MCU. But whether these films truly fit into the superhero genre is a matter of debate, and one that Scott seems to relish stirring up. Still, for all his bluster, Scott's critique raises some valid points. The Marvel machine, with its endless sequels, reboots, and interconnected storylines, has undeniably changed the landscape of modern filmmaking. The focus on franchise building often comes at the expense of standalone storytelling, and the pressure to deliver billion-dollar box office returns has led to a certain homogenization of style and tone. For cinephiles who grew up on the auteurs of the 1970s, directors like Scorsese, Coppola, and, yes, Scott, it's easy to see how the current state of cinema might feel like a betrayal of the art form. But Scott's argument becomes more complicated when you consider his own recent output. Films like House of Gucci and Napoleon have faced criticism for their over-reliance on spectacle and their lack of emotional depth, traits that Scott himself attributes to the MCU. Napoleon, in particular, has been accused of prioritizing grandiose battle sequences over character-driven storytelling, a charge that feels uncomfortably close to Scott's critique of superhero films. And then there's Gladiator 2. A sequel that seems designed to capitalize on the nostalgia of the original without offering much in the way of innovation. Early reviews have been mixed, with some praising its technical achievements, while others lament its formulaic approach. If there's one thing Scott seems unwilling to confront, It's the extent to which his own work has become entangled in the same commercial pressures he decries in the superhero genre. The success of Gladiator turned him into a director with an undeniable knack for crowd-pleasing epics, but it also set a template that he has struggled to escape. Films like Exodus, Gods and Kings, and Robin Hood have felt like pale imitations of his earlier triumphs, with their sprawling battle scenes and thinly sketched characters offering diminishing returns. Even his more intimate dramas, like All the Money in the World, have been criticized for prioritizing style over substance.
Strength and honor!
This tension between artistry and commerce is, of course, nothing new in Hollywood, and Scott is hardly the first filmmaker to wrestle with it. But his insistence on positioning himself as a defender of real cinema against the evils of the Marvel machine feels increasingly out of step with the reality of his career. At its core, his argument rests on a belief in the supremacy of auteur-driven filmmaking, a model that has become increasingly rare in an industry dominated by franchises and streaming services. Yet even Scott's most ardent defenders would have to admit that his recent output has been uneven at best, and his reliance on spectacle often undermines his claims to artistic superiority. It's worth noting, too, that not all superhero films fit the mold that Scott describes. While there's no denying that the MCU has its fair share of formulaic entries, there are also films that have pushed the boundaries of the genre in exciting ways. Black Panther, with its richly realized world and nuanced exploration of race and identity, was a cultural phenomenon that resonated far beyond the confines of the superhero genre. Guardians of the Galaxy, with its irreverent humor and offbeat characters, brought a fresh perspective to a franchise that could easily have become stale. Even Avengers: Endgame,
On my way down to coordinate search and rescue.
On my way down to coordinate search and rescue.
I mean, honestly.
with its sprawling ensemble cast and emotionally charged conclusion, managed to deliver a level of catharsis that few films, superhero or otherwise, can match. Scott's dismissal of these films as boring feels at best like a missed opportunity to engage with the nuances of the genre. At worst, it comes across as a stubborn refusal to acknowledge that good storytelling can come from unexpected places. If the MCU has taught us anything, it's that even the most commercialized, committee-driven productions can still surprise us with moments of genuine artistry. And while Scott may see himself as a guardian of cinema's past, his unwillingness to adapt to the changing landscape of the industry risks rendering him irrelevant in the eyes of a new generation of filmmakers. Of course, none of this is to say that Scott's contributions to cinema should be overlooked or dismissed. His best films, Alien, Blade Runner, Gladiator, Thelma and Louise, are masterpieces that have earned their place in the history of the medium.
You know, the Alien was a great franchise, and
You didn't do any of the others.
they never asked.
But his recent output, and his increasingly vocal criticisms of the industry, suggest a filmmaker who is struggling to reconcile his own legacy with the realities of modern Hollywood. In many ways, Scott's critique of the MCU feels like a critique of his own career, a battle between the filmmaker he once was and the director he has become. As the debate over the MCU and its place in cinema rages on, it's worth remembering that Scott's comments, for all their bluster, are ultimately just one man's opinion. The world of film is vast and varied, and there is room for both the auteur-driven dramas of the past and the franchise-driven spectacles of the present. If Scott truly wants to crush it, as he claims, he might do well to focus less on tearing down others and more on rediscovering the creative spark that made his early work so unforgettable. After all, cinema's greatest strength has always been its ability to evolve, to surprise us, and to challenge our expectations. And if Scott can embrace that evolution rather than resist it, he might just find himself leading the charge once again.